Chekhov's gun is a playwriting principle you can use to set up better plots, to make sure that your setups are actually paying off later in your story. The playwright Anton Chekhov had a theory where if you placed a gun in a drawer in Act 1, by the end of the play, a character would have to fire that gun. The idea behind this is if you have a character interacting with, say, an important prop or a piece of information that's planted early, you have to have that piece of information or prop become important later in the story. Here are 3 principles you can use to have better payoffs with the Chekhov's gun principle. If you are going to set up a prop or piece of information, do it earlier in the story. If you have a character placing that famous gun in a drawer 15 minutes before it goes off, the audience is still fresh in their minds that that character just put a gun in there. Whereas if it was way earlier in the story in Act 1, but then in Act 3, the character pulls it out to fire it, it becomes a meaningful surprise. The audience has put 2 and 2 together, like, oh my God, the gun was in the drawer, I forgot about that. If you give the audience enough time to forget about what they absorbed earlier on, for when it's to meaningfully come into action, it will be delightful and it will feel earned. Whereas if you don't give them that early plant, it'll just be a thing out of nowhere. If the character didn't have the scene where they planted the gun and they just fired it randomly at the end of the story, it would feel cheap because wait, where did that character get the gun? If you place it early in the story, give the audience enough time to digest and kind of forget about it with the other developments in the plot, you'll delight them when you bring that old element back with new context. Balance the significance of your Chekhov's gun with its visibility. If your character puts too much plot or meaningful importance on the Chekhov's gun, it will direct our attention to it. The less important it is, the more invisible it is, but the more important it is, the more meaningful it is. If the character put a lot of backstory around the gun when he was putting it in the drawer, oh, this is my grandfather's weapon that he took with him into 15 battles, and he gave it to my father, and his father gave it to my father, whatever. You put a lot of backstory and attention on it, you're increasing that object or piece of information's significance, which is a good thing because it makes it more meaningful to the characters perhaps, but it makes it more visible. If the gun is just a gun, and it's placed inside the drawer, it becomes easier to forget, which might make the surprise at the end more meaningful. So you want to balance how important the object or piece of information is that pays off later with how invisible it is. And this is a balancing act that you have to make for your story, but just be aware that if you put too much importance on it, it won't be surprising, but if you don't put enough importance on it, it might seem random. The third guideline, integrate your Chekhov's gun with your characters. Don't just have it be something that is completely irrelevant to the story. Have it be something that's connected to who your characters are or the situation. It has to be believable to the plot that's happening. In a film like Parasite, where they bring up the wealth stone, that has a lot of symbolic meaning to that family. It represents the family's collective hopes and dreams that they want to ascend to a new class of society. That rock represents everything, that when it's used as a weapon later on in the story, it has so much more significance. If in the framework of a 3-act story, you set up your Chekhov's gun in Act 1 and have it pay off in Act 3, it will give the audience enough time to digest and forget that information, so it will become meaningful when the characters have to transform and change at the end of your story. Integrating a piece of information or a plot point that's promised to come off later, early on when we're introduced to the characters, gives the audience a sense of immersion that they can forget that information for when it pays off and it really matters at the end. In Jaws, the oxygen tank that ends up blowing up the shark at the end, it isn't a cheap surprise when the oxygen tank blows up the shark because they planted it in an earlier scene. Be careful with that. That's very dangerous. In A Quiet Place, the hearing aid of the daughter that is later used as a weapon against the aliens. They establish what the hearing aid's effect is way earlier in the story, and when they finally pay it off by using it as a weapon, it's a surprise and it's delightful. In Pulp Fiction, the gold watch, Bruce Willis's character is established as having a huge emotional connection to this watch. Later on, when he forgets that watch in his apartment, which certainly has people who want to kill him in it, it becomes believable and inevitable that he has to go back and get it because of how much significance was placed on the watch earlier in the story. There's so many great examples, but the most important thing to remember is that its significance or visibility is completely tied to the nature of the story you're trying to tell. Like and subscribe if you want more content like this, and check out our free course, Writing the Short, with NYU professor John Warren, which covers everything you need to know about writing great short films. Thanks so much.